And welcome back. The Bronx is facing an unprecedented housing crisis where skyrocketing rents and widespread displacement are leaving thousands of residents struggling to keep a roof over their heads. The borough has become a battleground. Tenants organizing rent strikes, forming unions, mobilizing communities to take a stand against negligent landlords. Join me now, a tenant and housing advocate, Community Action for Safe Apartments CASA leader, Fitzroy A. Christian. Fitzroy, thanks for joining us.
And thank you for having us with you today.
Yes.
Um, and a happy new year to you and BronxNet and the Social Justice Forum.
Thank you. We receive all of that, and certainly it is a happy new year in some ways and not so happy in other ways. I mean, I think when we talk about what's going on in the state of New York City, and particularly when it comes to rent and rent regulation, uh, tell me from your perspective, how are you viewing things?
It's a crisis that I guess no one could have expected. We know that because housing is a commodity in New York State and New York City, virtually in the entire United States, that there would be problem because anything that is subject to market manipulation is going to be problematic. But the extent of the homelessness crisis and the unhomed crisis and the way that the courts themselves are a part of the problem in the increase in homelessness has made it worse than any of us could have expected. And this is why we are battling so ferociously for things to happen at the state level and at the city level to make sure that we don't see this unprecedented um, increase in evictions through the courts, through families giving up their homes because they cannot afford to stay here in their neighborhoods. We need to see this addressed thoroughly, and we need to see it stopped
Yeah.
because it is very destructive, and too many families are suffering physically, mentally because of the trauma they're going through with the uncertainty of being housed and staying in their communities.
First of all, when I think about where we are right now, and I think about the fact that the Bronx is, leading the nation when it comes to, health and, bad health. I think about the Bronx in unemployment and the numbers that are there. There's some numbers that we're not proud of. And then when we talk about the rising rent costs and the amount of people who've been affected by the rent crisis, we add that now to the list. Um, it's got to be burdensome for the average person who's trying to just basically make ends meet because, as I was sharing with someone just a little while ago, the cost of just being able to afford to eat and then also the cost to be able to afford to live, there's no money left over. And people are, and then paying rent, right? So when you see that, what are you hearing from your tenants today?
Okay, what we are doing is mounting a series of campaigns, which we hope to be successful at. And the success will bring a certain amount of relief, even though it may be temporary. At least there is some relief. Um, some of the activities, some of the actions we are taking is mounting a campaign for a rent freeze for the upcoming year and hopefully for the 4 years of the next mayoral term, for the next 4 years. We have already held at least two city halls, two forums, sorry, town halls, where we are demanding that those who are wanting to replace Eric Adams commit themselves to a rent freeze during their administration if they are successful at becoming the next mayor, because tenants need that. The landlords have been making historic profits in the area of about 30 plus percent annually, year after year. for the last 30, 35 years, they do not need another year of rent increase. Um, During the 3 years so far of Mayor Adams' term in office, his time in office, the rents have gone up 9.5%. This is very burdensome. Too many people cannot, as you just said, they cannot afford to eat and pay rent, take care of their families, clothing their children. Um, they have to make choices that human beings should not have to make. Do I have a good meal or do I pay my rent? Do I take a chance of being evicted because I don't pay my rent so that I can take my medicines the way they're supposed to be taken? Instead of taking half of the medication, as a lot of seniors do, so that they could stretch it out so they do not have to spend any more money for their medication. And so they cannot heal properly because they're not taking the full doses of their medication. And if they do that, then they don't have enough money left over to eat or to pay their rent. These are choices that we should be making as human beings. And this is why we are fighting for a rent freeze, so that tenants and all people will have an opportunity to be able to eat, pay their rent, take their medications, and at least take their kids or grandkids out for a little entertainment at least once a month. We need this, we need that, and we need the candidates who are running for mayor to understand that and to be willing to commit themselves to having, if not for the full 4 years of their term, at least 2 years that is a rent freeze to allow tenants and the residents of New York City to catch up.
As you're walking the streets of the Bronx and talking to fellow Bronx tenants, what are you hearing?
Apart from the immigration scare, which the new federal administration has brought in, we are hearing that they can no longer afford to stay in New York, even though Bronx is probably the cheapest of the 5 boroughs in terms of housing. The Bronx is under attack. Landlords, real estate corporations are focusing on the Bronx. This is the last area where they can colonize, if we want to use that phrase, and where they could make tremendous profits, because when they move tenants out of their current homes and those buildings become available, it is possible for them to build or to upgrade the buildings and be making 2-3 times the amount of rent that they're making now under the rent stabilized laws.
Yeah.
And this we cannot afford. The city is still giving away public money to these real estate folks, to the developers, and we're not getting anything back substantial in exchange for the monies, our monies that are being given away in this major corporate welfare system here in New York City and New York State.
You got the Bronx.
We are losing,
I'm
we
sorry.
are losing. Oh,
Oh,
sorry, go
no,
ahead.
no, no. You go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I think I heard a pause and I jumped in too quick.
Okay. We as tenants and residents of New York City, and here in the Bronx in particular, are losing any way we turn. The city is not protecting us. The borough president is not protecting us. Our city council members are fighting, but the city hall administration is pushing back. And if we can recall that Mayor Adams himself is a landlord, and he has been getting a whole lot of money from the real estate industry for his campaigns, that his allegiance is then very subject to, I should say, we have to suspect, it has to be suspect. Who does he really care for? The folks who voted for him or the folks who gave him money to run his campaign? So the decisions that he is making, we see the trend where they are almost always favoring landlords and the real estate industry, and almost always an onus on the back of the tenants who seem to be carrying the load and paying the penalty for um, the success and the further enrichment of the landlords.
Yeah. When it comes to evictions, seeing record
Uh,
numbers of, in some cases we're seeing record numbers of evictions. Talking to some legal attorneys, they're saying that things are bad, they're not as bad. What are you seeing on your end when it comes to evictions?
that they are worse than many of us want to admit.
So you do see it as bad.
Yes, I think it is very, very bad. Um, the problem is that the court, the Chief Justice, Mr. Wilson, is, excuse me, my phone just went off. I don't know if you could hear me or you could see me.
I can. You're good. Just keep talking. I see you and hear you.
Okay. What is happening is that the Chief Justice is more concerned about clearing the calendar of cases that are hanging out on the dockets, rather than making sure that the people who come to court do get their justice, that they do get the right that was given in 2017 under the de Blasio administration to have an attorney in court. The Office of Civil Justice is holding on to a lot of money, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that they're not releasing to the civil legal services organizations to hire more attorneys. So what is happening? People who meet the criteria for free legal representation are going through the court system without that protection, without that representation. They do not know the laws. They do not have the ability to fight back against the attorneys for the landlords who do this every day in court. So what is happening that they're losing their cases, and in the same vein, they're losing their homes. They're being evicted, not because they did something wrong, but because they do not have the ability to protect themselves, to assert their rights, and to introduce the type of information that the court would have to take into consideration for the behavior, the bad behavior of the landlords, not um, doing their repairs in a timely manner and not doing them properly, not providing the services that they're legally obliged to provide under the terms of the lease. They do not meet, in most cases, the standards set by the city for the building codes. But most of us as tenants do not know how to assert those rights, how to use that as a part of our defense so that we can get the landlords to be held responsible through the courts to be doing these things. And when they are forced to sign stipulations or agreements with the landlord's attorneys, those agreements are always one-sided, where the obligation is on the tenant to do everything, even though they're not responsible for what is happening in the buildings. And the landlord gets away scot-free because those stipulations do not include an obligation on the landlord to do the repairs or to provide those services that you're supposed to.
Yeah. From your own personal perspective, you got your own personal story. Share it a little bit with us.
Yeah, I came into this tenant organizing about 20 years ago because I had a problem with my landlord. Um, there was a big water break, main break on Jerome Avenue um, that took out Con Ed services for quite a while until they fixed it. Because of the resulting problems, an increase in my electricity bill eventually, no gas for 8 months, um, no repairs were being done, and the elevators were broken. I began to talk to other tenants and try to form a tenant association so that we can collectively approach the landlord and say, hey, look, these are the things that are going on. You need to correct it. We need to start be living here with some dignity, and you need to do something about it. I found myself kind of overwhelmed, and so I began to ask, where in the Bronx can I find help? And I was pointed to CASA. CASA was about 3 years old, 4 years old at that time. And like I said, the rest is history. CASA, the organizers, came to my assistance. We were able to get the landlord moving, to get the gas reinstalled, to get the services that we were entitled to restored. And since then, I have become a member and a crusader for CASA and for the work that they're doing. I'm now a leader, a member leader in the organization, and I teach the gospel of tenant organizing, of tenants forming tenant associations, of them becoming a member of organizations like CASA. There are a few of them here in the Bronx, the Northwest Bronx, Mothers on the Move, South Bronx United. We have quite a few groups that work with tenants. Um, and so I say, depending on where you live, join one of these groups
Right.
because these groups will work for you on your behalf, and it's almost always at no cost to you as a tenant, as a resident. So you're not losing, and you have so much to gain. This way, we as tenants can become united, we can become organized, and we are then in a much better place to fight back and assert our rights and get what it is that we deserve, especially after the victories we won with the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act in 2019.
Yeah. Fitzroy, I tell you, you've done a great job, and certainly thank you for being with us. We'll continue to update our viewers on these tenant issues and the matters of tenants and housing and this housing crisis that continues to not just only burden New York City, but more specifically right here, the borough of the Bronx, with these increasing rates. So thank you so much for joining us, Fitzroy. Glad to have you.
And thank you for having me, and continue the good work. You have been spreading that message out, and people have commented that they have seen the show, they have heard what you and seen what you're doing, and we appreciate that. Getting this message out is very, very important because the more people are aware of it, the more they take the opportunity to take advantage of what it is that is being offered to them. And we
Yes.
appreciate everything that you're doing to make that possible.
Well, thank you. Thank you. All right, Fitzroy.